Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name, as he says, Master Sergeant Ronnie White. I'm a veteran of 21 years of active duty service. I've been a junior ROTC instructor for 18 years. For the last 18 years, my mission has been to teach students to be good citizens. That has been my goal. That is the Army ROTC motto. That is our mission. Last year, in September, my school district voted 7-0 by the school board to bring the International Baccalaureate program to Christian County. And I am not here to sell the IBO. I am here against the IBO. Next slide, please. A quote from Abraham Lincoln. I want you to keep this quote in your mind as we go through here this evening. The philosophy of the classroom today will be the philosophy of government tomorrow. The government we have today stems from the classrooms of our high schools and colleges. I think we can do better than what we currently have. Next slide, please. The International Baccalaureate Organization is a non-governmental organization of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization known as UNESCO. A keynote here. Last week, the United States stopped funding UNESCO due to UNESCO voting to admit the Palestinian membership, the first UN activity to do so. We cut $65 million, the United States government did, from UNESCO. We are 20% of their budget. And Americans don't even know what we're spending our money on in that organization. Hopefully this evening you will know. Next slide. UNESCO is a specialized agency which operates under the Assembly of the United Nations, which in turn functions under the Charter of the United Nations, which in turn supersedes our own Constitution because the United States signed it as a treaty. This treaty was approved by our Congress when the United Nations was formed. Next slide, please. They have to score a minimum of 4 on each one to pass that examination. 4 times 6 equals 24. IB says if you get 24, you can get college credit. Not true. Just ask any local university. Look at Drury. Look at MSU. It's more like 30 or 35. So if your student was in this program and made 4s, they would not get any college recognition at all. So that is a very misleading statement on their part. Next slide, please. The IBO and UNESCO relationship. The IBO works hand in glove with UNESCO to implement the United Nations education objectives. To understand IB, you have to be aware of the overarching UN education campaigns that UNESCO works to implement. And here's some examples. 2001 to 2010 was the UN's decade for teaching a culture of peace. UNESCO states that peace equals absence of war plus equal distribution of economic and social resources. UNESCO's focus has been sustainable economic and social development. Teaching the culture of peace meant teaching the United Nations viewpoint on all social, economic, and environmental issues. 2005 through 2015 is the UN's decade of education for sustainable development, or Agenda 21. Agenda 21 was born in about 1996, I believe is when it was. And now it's in the education system under the IBO. This campaign carries forward UNESCO's concepts of economic and social justice through resource redistribution and environmentalism. And this is from UNESCO's own handbook. Next slide, please. The IBO has been and is a major player in implementing UNESCO's mainstreaming a culture of peace, their campaign. And this is reflected in the IB curriculum framework for subjects such as math, chemistry, and foreign languages, which academically have nothing to do with these issues. What is the framework? Develop intellectual skills, personal skills, emotional skills as a global citizen. That is the framework for IB at all levels. IBO's midterm report on the International Decade for a Culture of Peace on page 4 states its key difficulty in implementing the program was realizing that peace education is not an add-on, but an integral part of the curriculum at all levels. In other words, peace education is injected into every course. Next slide. IBO is on the front lines of implementing the Decade of Education of Sustainable Development as well. Demonstrated in the following remarks from a keynote speech giving at a biennial conference of IB Nordic Schools on September 9, 2005 by IB Director General George Walker. IB education is not simply about a good academic education, but rather an education process geared toward creating the true global citizen. Now, I don't know about you. I haven't taught school for 18 years to raise true global citizens. I have raised them to be good American citizens. And by virtue of being a great American citizen, the rest of the world works a whole lot better. The person who has the necessary intellectual skills, the cultural understanding and both the ability and the attitude that wants to shift another's position as well as their own. So the whole intent there is to shift their opinions on things. And they do that through a course called Theory of Knowledge. Director Walker finished his remarks by noting, but the IB can only do so much and within each element of the curriculum, and particularly in creating a hidden curriculum that determines the school's values. It will be the teachers and administrators who have an overwhelming influence. Even though a student can opt out of IB at the junior high and high school level, the climate of the school is the IBO value system. The IBO value system. And that doesn't fit well with what I teach. The average cost per teacher IBO professional development per year, too, is $2,000 for one teacher. The courses are not offered within the state, usually in places like Florida, California, wherever IBO wants to get a little sun. That's where they are, and that's where the teacher has to travel to. And they must attend these courses annually. Next slide, please. At the 2006 IBO conference in Hanoi, keynote speaker Dr. Peter Vardy spoke on the topic of values education, noting the need for IB to balance its focus on moral relativism and with appropriate values teaching, begging the question, whose values? Dr. Vardy labeled as dangerous any viewpoint that would teach good versus evil, right versus wrong, and specifically the American way. Dr. Vardy characterized Western ideas as confused. He praised Asian values, including Confucianism, as a kind of universal values that IB should teach. Dr. Vardy equated Christianity as a kind of fundamentalism on par with Islamic fundamentalism. Next slide, please. As part of its implementation of the UN's Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, the IBO held a regional conference in Singapore in 2007 with a presentation entitled Education for Sustainable Development, a framework for educational reform. So you can see that Agenda 21 is making its way into the educational process. This presentation effectively communicates that education for sustainable development is based more on redistribution than conservation of resources. It notes that values education, principles in peace, and human rights are to be included in an integrated education for sustainable development curriculum and aims for integration of sustainable development into relevant subjects. What type of human rights? Those mandated by the United Nations. Next slide, please. It is apparent from IBO's own material that Director General Walker was being absolutely candid in stating that IB education is not simply about getting a good education. IB's goal is to indoctrinate our children with UN globalist values that are often at odds with American values and Christian values and interests. Climate change, redistribution of wealth, the environment, global management of resources, and disarmament are hotly debated political issues within our society. By allowing IB into our schools, we effectively allow the UN free rein to indoctrinate our children with their viewpoints. Next slide. I'm getting close to the end here. I know this is kind of dry, but you really need to understand this information. IB is not an academic program. Each minute of class time in your child's biology class spent on the needs for resource redistribution or blaming mankind for global warming is time taken away from core subject. At the primary school level, time spent developing the UN's true global citizens' proper social conscience is time not devoted to basics. We feel strongly that it's time to start asking questions about your children's education, and especially IB. We have been astonished by the results of our research into IB, shocked that it is replacing quality education right here in our own school districts, and frankly outraged that this controversial program has been introduced into public schools without public discussion with all the stakeholders and about the controversies with the program. The web page that you see up there is pretty simple, truthaboutIB.com. I encourage you to go to that web page. I encourage each of you to do your own research on this particular program. Anytime that you tie United Nations with anything, it becomes suspect in my mind. As a soldier for 21 years, anytime I was asked to put on a blue helmet, I said no. I'm not going to do that. In conclusion, next slide. Yeah. All adult Americans possess the inherent responsibility to pass on to the next generation the God-given freedoms which were passed on to us by our forefathers. Freedom does not perpetuate itself. It must be sustained by those who understand it and who have earned the right to enjoy it. If our children are to understand freedom, they must be given truth, and only we can extend to them this saving hand of truth. Do not be talked down to by pseudo-intellectual educators, the progressives and liberals who tell you that only they are trained to teach your children and that you should have no voice in the matter. Do not permit your children to be robbed of everything that gives life meaning without lifting a hand in their defense. Work ceaselessly to secure for them a life founded on the incomparable American principle of freedom under God. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a lonely year in Ozark, Missouri. I am the only voice of opposition that speaks out in my community. I have many newspaper articles. I have done radio programs. I have done TV with the news. But nobody that is in an elected position will talk with me about it. It's cold in the classroom. I'm the only one that speaks out against this program in my whole school district. Now, there are many teachers that do not support it, but for fear of their job or whatever, they will not speak out. I'm asking you to become knowledgeable. Ask questions about IB. You're going to soon find out that you're not going to get answers. You're not going to find out what it costs to operate the IB program within your school district because it's hid with other things. You're not going to find out what they teach. They're not going to talk to you about it. They're going to tell you that it is a rigorous academic program with rigorous assessment. Now, I don't know about you, but where I come from, rigorous is not anything I really want to do. Rigorous is tough. Okay? Now, should an education be challenged? Yes. Can we fix the problem of our education system without an international organization? Yes. We've got to get the right people elected to school boards, and we've got to make sure that teachers get on task. For 18 years, I have challenged every student in my classroom. All teachers do not do that. I would like to thank you for your time, and again, www.truthaboutIB.com. Please do the research yourself. Thank you.